Then next up, there were two grammars that our friends over at Lexham Publishers sent me. Learning Biblical Hebrew by Cutzon Josberger and Biblical Greek Made Simple by Daniel Zacharias. So I read Learning Biblical Hebrew first. This was very helpful because what it really covered in much more detail than I ever got in seminary. And I took my Hebrew as like a summer intensive. So I didn't even have a whole semester. I just had like 8 weeks. We had to learn a year's worth of Hebrew. It was very intensive. Pratico led us through his and Miles Van Pelt's textbook. And he was probably the best professor I've ever had in any subject in seminary, just in terms of pedagogy. But there's only so much you can grasp in 8 weeks. So this was very helpful because it filled in a lot of what I never learned. And in particular, it spent a lot of time talking about the rules for how the vowels change. And if you've ever studied Hebrew, vowel changes are maddening. And if you don't learn the rules, which I never did, and I still don't, I mean, I read through this textbook, but I still by no means can spout the rules off the top of my head. But once you know those rules, Hebrew makes a lot more sense. It was really helpful in showing me how much I didn't know. And since this is Disciple Dojo, I got to give a shout out to the illustrations they used when talking about how nouns are used in Hebrew. There's a section and they used a picture of a martial artist breaking some bricks. So here you can see the focal point is the martial artist, not the bricks. This would be the subject of the verb. Whereas here, the bricks, this is talking about the object, or in this case, maybe the direct object. So just had to point that out because this is Disciple Dojo. I've literally never seen a Hebrew grammar that used pictures from martial arts before. That warmed my heart. But also it's two colors. So this is helpful because it can put the things that it's wanting you to see, the patterns, in red and then the rest of the print in black. So overall, I was very impressed with this. And I would actually like to, if I were able to retake Hebrew, from the ground up again, just study the basics using this as the textbook. I think that would be really helpful. So if you're looking for Hebrew grammar, definitely check it out. Then Biblical Greek Made Simple. I'm gonna take issue with the title of this one. Daniel Zacharias' book is anything but simple, honestly. It's simple in that it's short. It's meant to be, there are two things about this that was unique. One is you can see the chapter divisions here. They're colored by the bars on the side of the page. It's meant to be done through twice. So what he says in the preface is like, if you're doing this in a year, then the first semester you go through the book one time. And then the next semester you go through it again. And in each chapter, there are advanced exercises. So you go through it once to get an overall introduction to Biblical Greek. And then your second semester or your second time through, there's advanced stuff that you can now key in on that'll go a little further. And it times it out, like how much you should devote to each exercise. So here's a learning activity review, 30 minutes, advanced exercises, 1 hour, activity 2, 1 hour, memorize declension endings, 2 hours, learning activity 4, parsing practice, 1.5 hours, parsing work, first and second declension, 2 hours. So that is one way that it simplifies it, is you don't have to guess how much time you should be spending on this stuff. It also simplifies it and this is the second thing that makes this a unique text that I've seen, at least in terms of Greek grammars I've looked at, is it's specifically meant to be used with Logos Bible software. So Lexham, who publishes this, Lexham Press, is part of Faith Life, and that's who makes Logos Bible software. So this is intended to be used with the Greek starter package, the Logos Greek package. It talks about things like open your Logos Greek package, pull up this resource, open your Lexham Interlinear. Here's how you do a search for everything in the nominative case. Here's how you use the BDAG lexicon in Logos Bible software. Like, it is intended to be used with Logos, whether on your desktop or on the app. It's also in color, so you can't really see this on the camera very well, but the different parts of the verb are color coded. But the reason I say it's not what the title says, it's not Greek Made Simple, is because it is full of paradigm after paradigm after paradigm. And it gets overwhelming. I mean, this many paradigms just gets overwhelming if you don't have a teacher walking you through it. So that's my caveat. This is not a slight against the author against Lexham, anything like that. This is just, I think this is not geared towards people that are doing self-directed study, or if it is, I'm just not one of the people that intuitively grasp the way he lays things out. And I use Logos Bible software, but I do not use Logos for very much regarding the languages. For that, I mostly use Accordance. I use Logos for like reference resources. So I'm not the target audience for this grammar, but I really do appreciate Logos sending it to me. And if you are a Logos user, this might be right up your alley. So check it out and see what you think. After that, I read Sandra Gland's book, Nobody's Mother, Artemis of the Ephesians in Antiquity and the New Testament. This book was phenomenal. This is all about the background to the Artemis cult and how earlier scholars presumed a lot of things about Artemis that aren't actually based in history. They're based more on tradition or later Christian polemics. And so it talked about Artemis of the Ephesians, Artemis of Ephesus, and this is the famous picture of Artemis. And earlier people felt that these bulbous things around her were breasts, like that she was a fertility goddess. But Gland makes a good argument that no, Artemis wasn't a fertility goddess. She protected women during childbirth, but she was a virgin. She was chaste. She was not about promiscuity or sexuality. She was the opposite of, like, say, Aphrodite. You know, some have said, oh, that they're breasts because she was a fertility goddess. And others have said, no, they're actually bull testicles because it had to do with procreation and fertility or something like that. And Gland quotes a number of historians and gets really into the details. And in actuality, they're neither of those. They were teardrop-shaped pendants that were emblematic of Artemis worship. Artemis was a chaste goddess. She was a virginal goddess. She protected women through childbirth or killed them with her arrows, lest they experience prolonged pain. And so the big payoff is when Paul is writing to Timothy in 1 Timothy 2 about not permitting a woman to usurp the authority of men and that she will be saved during childbearing. It is all but certain that he is referencing heavily the cult of Artemis that the Ephesian Christians would have been very well familiar with and many would have come out of. And so Paul, in that section to Timothy, is promising the believers something better than Artemis in terms of protecting women through childbearing. So anyway, this is another author. I would love to connect with Dr. Gland and have her on to talk about this book. So if anybody out there can make that connection, that'd be awesome, because this was a very, very interesting book, incredibly helpful for especially how we read a very controversial passage in the New Testament. So if you're a history nerd, a New Testament nerd, ancient Greek culture nerd, this is right up your alley. After that, I read Gavin Ortlund's book, What It Means to Be Protestant. I was unfamiliar with Ortlund. I looked him up after this on YouTube. He has a successful YouTube channel. He does a lot of really good content. And I read this because I spent so much time reviewing the Ignatius Catholic Study Bible and talking with our Catholic friend, Matt Thomas. And so I thought, it'd be helpful to read from a Protestant a book about why he's a Protestant and to actually defend. I mean, I'm not defensive about being a Protestant, and I don't attack Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy. And I have great respect for those traditions, but it's just not a church tradition that theologically I would be comfortable being a part of for a number of reasons. And so I picked up Ortlund's book at SBL, finally got around to it, and it was very, very good. So then I looked at his YouTube channel, and his YouTube channel is really good. Go check him out, guys. Give him a follow here on YouTube. But this basically broke up into 3 parts. Part 1 was Protestantism and Catholicity. So Protestantism's core identity, the one true church, catalyst for Reformation, the recovery of sola fide. Then part 2, Protestantism and authority, the case for sola scriptura, objections to sola scriptura, the papacy, apostolic succession. Then part 3, Protestantism and history, Protestantism as retrieval. And then 2 case studies, Mary's Assumption and icon veneration. And then there's a conclusion as to those considering ecclesial changes. So what I really liked about this was it disagreed without being defensive or antagonistic. It made the case for why Protestants believe what we believe, And then it engaged with the arguments that anti-Protestant Catholics, in particular, also some Orthodox, but mostly Catholic apologists engage in. So I would recommend this if you are a Protestant and you've never really thought about why you're a Protestant. Maybe you've given thought to becoming a Catholic or Orthodox, and you have friends or people on YouTube that are kind of sound convincing, like, oh, I need to actually come back to the one true church, that kind of stuff. This would be a great book for you to read and see after you finish it if you still land there. Likewise, if you're not a Protestant, my Catholic viewers, my Orthodox viewers, and I know there are a lot of y'all because you let me know in the comments, usually to call me a heretic, you need to read this book to see why so many of us don't find your church tradition as convincing as you do. It's not an attack on Catholicism as much as it's a defense of Protestantism as a viable form of the gospel. So I definitely recommend this book. This was one of the better books I read this year as well. Another book from Lexham. Lexham is awesome to send me books to review. And this one was Textual Criticism of the Bible by Amy Anderson and Wendy Witter. And this is an introduction to the field of text criticism. Introduction to text criticism, an overview of textual criticism, introduction to Old Testament text criticism, introduction to New Testament text criticism in the Bible today. Very simple, straightforward. It has a lot in the beginning section about translations and different translations and what philosophies they operate from. And there's kind of a spectrum from the literal to the free. And there's case study for a different passage. So in this case, 1 Timothy 3:6 in 4 different translations, how the Greek phrases are translated. And then it gets into the technical aspect of text criticism, but in a way that introduces you. This is suitable for an introductory audience, or at least, I don't know if introductory is the right word, a motivated biblical nerd could handle reading this easily. You don't have to know Greek or Hebrew. In fact, they transliterate, or in this case, they just use an English example to show you the equivalent of how Hebrew and Greek were written in the manuscripts in running script for the New Testament, or without vowels for the Old Testament. They show you this is what the Dead Sea Scrolls looked like. Then they get into Old Testament text criticism and the different models of the different textual families and how the Old Testament text may have developed. They give you 3 different models here diagrammed out. Show you examples like what are the Masorah, the notes that the Masoretes put in the margin. They let you look at it. Different types of Hebrew, Paleo-Hebrew, unpointed, and then Masoretic pointed. There's maps of where the different translations, the different languages were found. There's examples in text criticism, like for instance, they illustrate metathesis. Some manuscripts read this way, and they show you it's just because switching the letters through confusion and you get a different word. And they do the same for the New Testament as well. So if you appreciated our course here on the channel, Bible for the Rest of Us, Bible for the Rest of Us is our intro course to how to interpret the Bible. We have 2 sections that have to do with text criticism and translation theory. If you enjoyed that series, if you haven't seen it, I'll link it in the video description below. Watch it. You can do it with a small group or individually. Free downloadable workbook, participant guide, all of that's on the website. If you wanted more after doing that course, this would be the perfect follow-up to Disciple Dojo's Bible for the Rest of Us course. Wholeheartedly recommend this to people that are interested but not yet actively studying in the field of text criticism. This would be right up your alley. This sits right in between like popular level and technical scholarly. This bridges the gap. And that's what we're about here at Disciple Dojo. So I cannot recommend this highly enough. Another book Lexham sent me to review, and I just finished this, Andrew Perrin's book, Lost Words and Forgotten Worlds, Rediscovering the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is a great introduction to the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you don't know what they are, how they were found, how they came about, it's like a history of it. It has pictures, color pictures. It talks about the different manuscripts, how they were pieced together. This is a great overview of the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you're not familiar, this is probably the most concise and easiest one-stop shop to get familiar. A lot of pictures, fairly quick read. It was 9 chapters, and it's written at a conversational level. This is not written in scholarly jargon. It's written using colloquial language, figures of speech, just good, solid historical background to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Definitely recommend it. And in fact, Lexham sent me an extra copy. So in an upcoming Open Mat episode, I'm going to be giving away this copy to a viewer. So the only way to know when that's going to happen is to subscribe to the channel and enable notifications, because I post on the feed when we're going to do upcoming Open Mat episodes, and we'll be giving this away in the next one. Then the book that took me the longest to read this year so far, and it's because it's thick, and this is Ed Kamazuski and Robert Bowman's book, The Incarnate Christ and His Critics. Now, deceptively, this doesn't look super thick, but these are almost Bible thin pages. So this is actually 852 pages. Like, this is a bear to read, but it's a textbook and it's comprehensive. This is a study of everything that has to do with defending the incarnation of Christ, a biblical defense of what it means to believe in the Orthodox Christian Trinitarian view of Jesus as God incarnate. And it's laid out using the acronym of HANDS. So the sections are: H is honors. Jesus receives the honors due only to God. So that's the H section. Then A is attributes. Jesus possesses the attributes of God. So that's looked at in part 2. Then in part 3, Jesus bears the names of God. Part 4, Jesus does the deeds that God alone does, like nature miracles or forgiving sins. And then part 5 is the S in HANDS is seat. Jesus occupies the seat of God's throne. And throughout each of the sections, they compare the traditional or the historic Christian view of the incarnation, whether it's Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church, or Protestant churches, with 6 different heterodox views of Jesus. So they compare it to the myth view of skeptics, like Jesus was a myth, he never existed. The prophet view of Muslims, Muslims believe something very different about Jesus than Christians do, even though they revere Jesus as a prophet. The mystic view among progressive Christians like Marcus Borg or John Shelby Spong. The man above all others view, that's the view of Unitarians. The Michael the Archangel view, which is the view of Jehovah's Witness and some Seventh-day Adventists. The Mormon's God, the view of the Latter-day Saints Church. And then Jesus as manifestation of the Father. So that's the view of oneness Pentecostalism, that Jesus and the Father weren't two persons, that was the same, just wearing different faces, so to speak. So each chapter looks at Jesus in light of those particular views in the categories of the HANDS acronym: honors, attributes, names, deeds, and seat. So there are 38 chapters in all in the 5 different parts, and then a conclusion. Then at the end, there's a review of the HANDS acronym. So part 1, the honors. So this is the chapter in the book that talks about it. This is the type of honor that Jesus receives. These are passages in the Bible where Yahweh, God, receives those honors. And then these are passages in the New Testament where Jesus receives those honors. And it does that for all of the parts: attributes, the names of God, the deeds that only God is able to do, and then the seat of God, God's throne. And so you can see all the biblical references. It does pretty in-depth exegesis of most of these passages, if not all of them. That's why this is so thick. That's why it took me so long to read, because it really goes into it. Every possible objection that I can think of that I've ever heard to the incarnation, to the deity of Christ, is addressed in this book. Ed is a friend of ours here on the channel. I am going to be having him in to talk more about this book. It's just a case of getting our schedules to line up. But in the meantime, I wholeheartedly recommend this. Every Christian should have this on their shelf. It is a phenomenal resource. I wouldn't necessarily say to sit down and barrel through it like I did all at once, but have it as a resource. Use the appendix. Check the different passages and how they deal with them. If you have friends that are in any of the different views that they cover, Muslims, Latter-day Saints, progressive Christians, oneness Pentecostals, Jehovah's Witness, this would absolutely be a resource that you might want to have handy. And then lastly, one final book, again from our friends at Lexham, The Apocalypse of John Among Its Critics, Questions and Controversies. It's edited by Alexander Stewart and Alan S. Bandy. The afterword is by Greg Beale. This is a collection of 10 essays that have to do with the book of Revelation, and it is really good. So there's an introduction, and then the first essay, should John's apocalypse be in the canon? There was debate for quite a while about Revelation. And in Greek Orthodox Church, Revelation didn't even become part of the canon for centuries. Only relatively recently did Greek Orthodox accept Revelation. But it was questionable in other parts of the church as well, particularly in the early centuries. So this is a good overview of that, the history of it becoming part of the canon. Then there's one on the genre of revelation. Then John threats and fear appeals. Was John a bully? John in punishment. Did he delight in violence? John in dissenting views. Was he intolerant? Then our friend Rob Dalrymple, who has been here on the channel before, he did the chapter, Was John Anti-Semitic? Then a chapter on Revelation in the future, Was John a false prophet? And then the final essay, John in government. Does the apocalypse advocates political subversion? Then after that, Greg Beale wrote the afterword, and it's a long afterword, and it traces the history of scholarship on Revelation, and particularly how Revelation uses the Old Testament. Of all of the essays, well, it wasn't really an essay, it was the afterword. That was the one that was the least engaging, honestly. Like this one would appeal only to scholars of Revelation, I think. The rest of them would appeal to students of Revelation in a more general sense. But overall, this was really, really good. If you have particular interest in the book of Revelation, this is a great resource. We have a full course here at Disciple Dojo called Revelation, a guided tour of the apocalypse. I'll link that in the video description. It comes with a free downloadable workbook. It walks through the book chapter by chapter, and we talk about some of the stuff that the essays in this explore in a lot more detail. So if you've watched that course here on the channel, this would be a good follow-up to that, just like the text criticism book would be a good follow-up to Bible for the Rest of Us. So that's what I've been reading so far this year. Hopefully something in this pile caught your interest. It would take way too long for me to link all of these in the video description below. So just watch the video, do an Amazon search for any of these. You can find them. They're all still in print, except for maybe Scrooge McDuck. But I'd love to hear if you've read any of these. What were your thoughts on them? If you haven't, which of these from this episode piqued your interest? Which of these would you most like to read? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. As always, stay tuned. Later in the year, I'll do an update with what I'm currently reading right now, and we'll have finished probably in the fall sometime, and then maybe one more at the end of the year to wrap it up. But that'll do for now. Thanks for watching. As always, stay tuned for more here at Disciple Dojo, and in the meantime, keep training.